Hello everybody, welcome back to some more Overwatch League Pick'ems. I'm here on my own today, mostly because there's a main reason why I want to do this on my own this week. That's because I have a lot to talk about. Going into this week is the final week of the East region, so there's a lot of implications as to where positioning is on the leaderboard. A lot of APAC still can move a lot, whereas the West region, it's pretty concrete right now. Most teams are locked where they're at. There could be like some adjustment here and there in the coming weeks, but like as for who's clinched in, who's knocked out, pretty much guaranteed who it is, especially in the West region. In fact, everyone right now who's all three teams are eliminated right now. That being New York, Vancouver, and Paris, which is unfortunate, but for Vancouver fans, because I think Vancouver was really exciting, especially going into this tournament. They're still pulling off great showings, as I'll bring up in just a moment. But first, going into talking real quick about last week, it kind of shows more of where teams are situated on the skill on the tiering system right now. The Charge lost to the Dynasty 3-0. They also beat the Fusion in a map 5, and then Valiant beat both Chengdu and Hangzhou in map 5 finishes. Again, that's how Valiant's been taking these matches. The matches they win, they go to map 5, and it's really close. And I think that might work in their favor a little bit going into this week. Shanghai, they lost 3-1 to the Fusion, and then they beat the Spark map 5. And then Chengdu, they lost both their matches to the Hunters and to the Dynasty, and the Dynasty won both their games. As for the West region, I think it kind of shows where London is in this meta, which is towards the bottom right now. I mean, they couldn't even take a map off either the Gladiators or the Fuel. And I mean, last week, week 1, they won both their games, but they lost a map to Paris and they lost a map to Vancouver. That's not what you want if you're the London Spitfire. And I think this kind of shows that London in this meta right now is not doing that great, which is kind of unfortunate because you would think that this would be a metagame they would thrive in a bit, but it seems like they're prioritizing playing Hottie over Paco, even though this is a metagame designed for players like Paco, who are good at D.Va, who are good at Zarya. And London is just kind of obsessed with trying to stick with the Winston and stuff like that and running Hottie on it. And it just isn't working for them. The Fuel had easy matches this week going against Titans and London, sweeping both. We also saw the Shock pick up their first win this week against the Atlanta Reign. I expected them to lose to the Reign. I think that the Reign was a team that they would struggle against, especially since how the Reign were looking really good going into last week. But one team that really surprised me was Toronto. Not just again in their match against the Shock, where they looked really, really good, but in their match against the Titans, where they just couldn't do anything. Every time they would start to get ahead, Vancouver would just knock them back down. And it's really weird because that was not the Toronto we saw on Friday, where they seemed pretty dominant over the Shock. So it's big question marks for a lot of these teams like Atlanta, Toronto, London, and the Shock, but also somewhat for the Gladiators and the Justice. The Gladiators, they had a pretty easy game against the Spitfire, but they really struggled against the Excelsior. They almost lost to them. It was a really close game. Honestly, a really exciting game. Even though I predicted the Gladiators to win, I was rooting for New York through and through because that was their opportunity to to make it, but now that they lost, they are currently tied with Vancouver, but because of Vancouver's placement in the Summer Showdown, Vancouver's actually higher ranked than New York. So New York is also knocked out. Which means, which actually I can flip over here. What you're seeing right here is the guaranteed of who is in the playoffs and who is not. Vancouver, New York, and Paris are all cut off from being in the play-ins. So it's just a matter of playing for seeding. And for Houston and Atlanta, pretty much, and I guess to a degree London, but London is unlikely to win, especially since I think this week is their off week, if I recall correctly. The chances are Houston's going to be the one skipping play-ins, which is really nice. So chances are what you are seeing here with the top four is how it's going to be for the West region. And I could see those last six being mixed up a little bit. Like, I feel like Florida's going to be 10th seed. Maybe even Justice going to 9th and Boston going up to 8th. We could see Boston go to 9th, or we could even see Boston stick to being in 10th place. Where I'm expecting to see a lot of shakeup is 5, 6, and 7, where chances are Toronto and Atlanta are going to go above London, or at least Atlanta's going to. At least that's what we would expect. And then back to what I was saying about the East region having a lot of implications this week, is while the Dynasty and the Dragons are guaranteed for playoffs, they don't even have to play in the play-ins, the rest of APAC is completely free. The Valiant and the Charge right now are tied. The only difference is Charge's points are one higher than the Valiant because of the Summer Showdown. And then you have Chengdu and Hangzhou, who are both not looking good at all. Spark hasn't really been able to pick up any wins since mid-season madness. So really, the Spark are not looking great. We could honestly see Valiant or Charge go to 5th. That is definitely a possibility. And I did say the Valiant could go to 5th because the Valiant have an opportunity to make it to play-ins. There's just one thing in their way. If they can beat the Guangzhou Charge on Friday, the Valiant will clinch play-ins. And I'm just saying this now. If the Valiant make it to play-ins, I honestly believe that the Valiant could make it to playoffs. That's not a joke. That is my honest answer. I believe the Valiant have what it takes to make it to playoffs. They've been able to beat the Fusion, they've been able to beat the Spark, and they've been able to beat the Hunters. If they can beat the Charge, they're in play-ins. Because regardless, no matter how they beat the Guangzhou Charge, they have a better map differential. If they can beat the Charge, that'll give them that 8th point, which will put them above the Charge, as well as a better win-loss record than the Charge. And then even if they lose to the Dragons in a 3-0, they still beat the Charge. So Valiant only needs to beat the Guangzhou Charge in order to make it to playoffs, or at least to the play-ins. And it would seem likely that they could make it. Like, that's an honest answer, like an honest thought that I have. And to quickly just to go straight into what we're looking at for the East region this coming week, is the Seoul Dynasty and the Hangzhou Spark. I mean, it's pretty obvious that it's going to be a 3-0. Like, the Spark haven't been able to do much, especially with Teru and Neko as their support line. It's just not working out for them. I I still am unsure as to what the problem is with like Gouchway, or not Gouchway, but with like Super Rich and I still can't think of their other support player. Uh, but the Spark are a team that started the season on top of the world, and now they're literally in the having the threat of being in ninth place in in eighth of the East region. Next up is the match that will determine Valiant's fate in play-ins. I think that the Valiant can win this. I think that it's going to be a map 5 like all of Valiant's games. But I genuinely think that the Valiant have what it takes. I mean, with Marvel being on the team now, he's done absolutely amazing. The Valiant losing their one coach in between the Summer Showdown and the Countdown Cup has really helped this team, and I think that that's what this Valiant has needed since the beginning. They've lost one game this tournament. One game. And even though all of their other matches are really close, they've been able to win. And that's something that they've just never been able to do this year or even last year. And to see them being able to do it now, I mean, it's do or die for them. If they choke against the Charge, they're done. Even if they beat the Dragons, that will just put them back to being even with the Charge. And the Charge will still have one more point over the Valiant. So this match is literally do or die for the Valiant. Next up, though, is the Spark and the Hunters. This is honestly a hard one to predict, but I do got to give it to the Charge, and not to the Charge, but to the Hunters. And I think it's going to be a fairly straightforward victory for the Hunters. Pretty much like I said with the Spark, they're clearly struggling, and it's not looking good for them. And I easily can see the Hunters beating them. Next up, though, we have the Dragons and the Valiant. This really doesn't have a huge impact on what the placing is going to change with. It's just a matter of, I mean, really, there is nothing. If the Valiant lose to the Charge, this match doesn't matter whatsoever, and if they beat the Charge, this match doesn't matter, because regardless of if they win or lose, they're guaranteed being over the Charge. So just for jokes, I guess, I'm going to give this to the Valiant. Shanghai has been sandbagging this tournament really hard, and I think the Valiant are going to be able to take advantage of that. I mean, the Dragons are in a pretty bad downward spiral right now, at least until playoffs begin. So it's definitely an opportunity for the Valiant to take advantage of it and secure an even better positioning in the tournament. Next up is the Hunters and the Fusion, likely playing for third place, for third seed. And I gotta give it to the Fusion. I think it's gonna be a close game. But the Fusion just have such better players than the Hunters. Even though you have the MVP leave on your team, you still have, Zest, MN3, and just a phenomenal team here that is struggling, but pretty much everyone in APAC is. The only teams that really are not is the Dynasty and the Valiant, and to a lesser extent the Guangzhou Charge. But that's because the Valiant and the Charge are playing for just to make it to play-ins, whereas Seal's pretty much trying to guarantee themselves first seed and hopefully a title. A title has eluded them. A Grand Finals title has eluded them for ages. 2020, they almost got it. 2022, this might be their year. And they're looking to go into this the playoffs with a vengeance to get their redemption from 2020. And I think that is possible. But regardless, I do think that the Fusion just have a huge advantage over the Hunters. And I think that's going to come into play during this match. close out Sunday, though, we have Shanghai and Chengdu. I gotta give this to Shanghai. I'm gonna give it a pretty solid 3-1 victory for the Dragons. I think that they are, even though they're sandbagging, I think that they just want to make sure that they're looking as good as possible, and this is where the Dragons need to kind of prove that they aren't choking, that they're just sandbagging, and that they can dominate still. And I think this might be the opportunity they're going to take. They might do it against the Valiant, but really, I think anyone would expect the Valiant to lose pretty hard to them. But lastly, we have the Dynasty and the Fusion. I'm not even going to give Fusion a map with this. I think that the Dynasty are just going to absolutely roll them. Maybe even a full sweep. Bold prediction, the Fusion are not going to get a single point against the Dynasty this week. But that closes out not only the East region this week, but for the rest of the year until we get to playoffs. And by what it looks like, just basing it off of Chengdu getting an 0-2 of the week, Fusion getting a 1-1. That would leave this literally identical outside of the Charge and the Valiant flipping. Yeah, so Seoul is guaranteed first seed East. Shanghai's guaranteed second seed East. Because even if Shanghai went 2-0 and Seoul went 0-2, Shanghai would be down 1 point. Moving on to the West region now, we have the Paris Eternal and the Houston Outlaws. I think it's going to be 3-0 for Houston. I don't think that Paris is going to be able to do much against Houston. And Dante needs to avenge not being in the MVP candidate running. Next up, we have the Boston Uprising against Washington Justice. I gotta give this to the Boston Uprising. I think it's going to be a fairly decisive victory. I think it's going to be a 4-map series, maybe 5, but I think that might be a draw. Regardless, I think that the Uprising have this. Now that they're able to run Punk without Lori, this team looks like they're going to be a lot better this tournament. In fact, they might even have a somewhat competent run in playoffs if they make it there. I'm excited to see what this Boston Uprising squad can do, and hopefully the Justice keep wetting the bed like they did last week. Next up, though, we have the Florida Mayhem and the Vancouver Titans. Last week we saw Vancouver pull off an upset. I see it happening again. I think it's going to be a map 5. Florida looks decent, but again, they're not performing the best that they've. This has probably been the worst that we've seen the Mayhem in a while. They lost 3-1 to the Gladiators. They lost 3-0 to the Uprising. And then they didn't play last week. So the Mayhem not looking great. They are yet to pick up a victory, and I think that Vancouver's going to take advantage of that by upsetting yet another team. Next up is the Mayhem in the Rain. Again, I think this is going to be a Rain victory, but I think Florida's going to put up a somewhat decent fight. It's still going to be decisive from the Rain with a 3-1, but I think that definitely the Mayhem are not going to be able to pick up this victory against the Rain. Next up, we have the Gladiators and Justice. I know this seems weird, but I'm going to give this to the Justice. We saw last week that the Justice had a pretty decisive victory over the Excelsior, but we also saw the Gladiators go map 5 to the Excelsior themselves. Even though they still won, the Justice had a better read on the Excelsior, whereas the Gladiators almost lost to the Excelsior. So waging off of that, itself, I believe that the Washington Justice have an opportunity to beat the Gladiators. That, and if you look at week 1, they were able to beat the Shock. And so I feel like it could just be the fact that the Justice are able to beat these like super high tier teams right now, and then just completely wet the bed against everyone else. Next up for Saturday, we have the Battle for Texas one more time in the regular season, as Dallas goes against Houston. As much as I want to give this to the Outlaws, I gotta give it to the Fuel. Dallas is looking monstrous right now, and I think that this is the opportunity that Dallas needs to kind of assert their dominance and ensure that they get that first seed. And this week is what's going to determine it, because Dallas has some tough competition. They have the Outlaws, and then they have the Reign on Sunday. They have a lot going on this. So I feel like it's definitely winnable for Houston, but it's also Houstonable. And I'm going to lean it more towards Dallas just picking up the victory here. Next up, we have Toilet Bowl once again, as Vancouver faces Paris Eternal on the third Sunday of the tournament. Wasn't that Summer Showdown that happened in? It was not. What week was that? I know it was Summer Showdown. Oh, it was first week. But the first match on a Sunday in the tournament. Could that spell the same result? Yeah, in fact, actually, I think it's going to be just as dominant. I think Vancouver's going to have an amazing performance against the Paris Eternal, and it's going to prove that really the Vancouver Titans belong in the play-ins. Next up, though, we have the Dallas Fuel and the Atlanta Reign. Atlanta looks okay right now. I mean, they had a pretty bad matchup against the Shock last week. You know, they went map 5 against them, but at the same time, Dallas is an entirely new beast, and it's clear that they're going to win. But I think Atlanta's going to be able to put up a decent fight. And going map 4 to them, I feel like maybe push is where they could pick up the victory. If not, maybe hybrid. But I think regardless that this is Dallas hands down. Lastly, we have the Uprising and the Gladiators. This one, for me, is difficult because, I mean, again, we look back at Boston's performance in Week 1. They went 3-0 against the Mayhem, and they also went 3-1 against the Houston Outlaws. Both of those teams are... I mean, the Mayhem, not so much, but the Outlaws are a really good team, and I feel like they're honestly better than the Gladiators in this tournament. So, when you look at the Uprising, I gotta give it to them. I think that this is definitely a winnable game for the Uprising, and I really am excited to see this match because I feel like this could either prove that Boston is a threat, or that their Week 1 performance is just a fluke, and it really wouldn't surprise me. But that does do it for Week 3. There's definitely a lot riding on this week, and I really hope that we can see some excitement, particularly coming from the East region, because there is a lot to play for here. And it all just kind of comes down to Friday in that Valiant Charge map. If the Valiant can pick up the victory against the Charge, they're guaranteed play-ins. And I gotta say, I believe that's guaranteed playoffs. And that's just astonishing. We went from this year thinking that the Valiant were still just going to go winless. We thought they were going to be Paris Eternal. We thought they were going to be 0-20. Plus whatever matches are left to play. None for them, really. Be what, 20 plus... My math was really bad. Is that 22? Yeah, 22. So everyone thought they were going to be 0-24 going into this year. But here they are, 7-15. an opportunity to play in the playoffs, all they have to do is just beat the Guangzhou Charge. That's all they have to do, and they're guaranteed play-ins. They're guaranteed to be given an opportunity for a tournament, and it's the playoffs. It's the first tournament that the Valiant has been able to get access to since playoffs 2020. It has been 2 years since the Valiant has gotten into a tournament, and it's going to be in playoffs. And really, I think the Valiant have some great matchups going into it. So, I mean, again, let's go and look back at these placings. Like, going into the play-ins matches, they can beat Chengdu, they can beat Spark, they can beat Fusion. Whoever is in that 3 that makes it into playoffs without needing to go through play-ins is in for one awful matchup. Whoever isn't in that, and whoever the Valiant has to face for play-ins is in for a tough match. And then going into it, I mean, they have a great matchup against Florida. I think that the Justice, they could beat the Justice. I could say they would even beat the London Spitfire. Like, Valiant are looking really good right now. And even though they got swept by the Dynasty is one of those top teams. They're on the same echelons as the Fuel and the Shock. So that's kind of expected, but when you come... In fact, they're actually better than both the Fuel and the Shock. Even though they have a worse record, they have a much better map differential. So, the Valiant are definitely a top runner here. I think that they definitely have a massive opportunity to prove themselves. And I think that this team is excellent. I think that they have what it takes to make it into playoffs, and I really hope that they can make it, because the Valiant are the true underdogs right now. Like, sure, there's Boston and Washington and Toronto, but none of them come up to the Valiant. Like, they're the new Shanghai right now. They're what the Shanghai Dragons were in the 2020 playoffs that they were like now. Like, the Valiant are the losing streak team who are now making it to playoffs. They just got to secure that spot, and it all comes down to Friday where they take on the Guangzhou Charge. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm really excited about it. Like, I am genuinely excited to see the Valiant versus the Charge. And I don't care who you are, that is going to be the best match of the week, because there's just so much at stake. Because the winner is in play-ins, and the loser is in the cutoff. So, but that does it for Pick'ems. We're heading into the final 2 weeks of the season. There's not much room for error at this point when it comes to the East region. The West region, there kind of is. As long as you make it to play-ins, I guess. Houston, pretty much guaranteed to be the ones to make it to playoffs without having to battle for it. But who knows? This could definitely go either way. There's a lot of teams that could definitely have some trouble. But let's hope that the excitement doesn't stop. It hasn't stopped yet, so why stop now? Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next week. Have a good day.